Mr. President, order number 2, in the name of the leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Seafarers Bill 2026.
Mr. President, I'm seeking your permission to treat to orders number 2 and 3 as a cognate debate, please.
The question is that orders number 2 and 3, number 2, dealing with the maritime jurisdiction and related matters, Maritime Areas Jurisdiction and Rights Act, and number 3, implementation of the International Convention in relation to seafarers, and both being maritime and related matters. The leader of the House is proposing that these matters be treated as a cognate debate. Just to remind that that is in relation to the second reading. The policy issues of either or both can be discussed, but in relation to the votes, they will be voted on individually and taken through their stages. So the question is that orders number 2 and 3 be taken as a cognate debate. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it. Senator Cummins, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to take the time to go through these 2 pieces of legislation for the benefit of the honourable members of this chamber and, of course, for the public. Mr. President, in 2018, when the government came to office, somewhere around September of that year, I assumed the role of chairman of the Bridgetown Port. Upon assuming office, the then minister of the ministry, as it was at the time, of Blue Economy was the Honourable Kirk Humphrey. And together we encountered a scenario that we had perhaps not anticipated. And what was that scenario, Mr. President? Barbados had been scheduled to have an audit under the umbrella of the International Maritime Organization, otherwise called IMO, as I will refer to it from here on in. And the IMO at the time was scheduled to have an audit of Barbados to ensure that our maritime laws, and I'll go through what some of the things needed to be at the time in a minute, were in order and in keeping with the standards of the IMO at the time. We were not in compliance, Mr. President, with the standards of the IMO, and we sought at that time to defer Barbados's completion of the audit rather than undertake the audit and fail it. That was a decision that was taken at the time. We agreed that we would undertake a comprehensive body of work to be able to bring Barbados into compliance with the obligations of the International Maritime Organization. Now, Mr. President, that is no different than Barbados's posture generally on any other international convention, in any other area, whether it is on human rights, whether it is on labor. Earlier today, I laid 4 items under the International Labor Organization. We make sure that we are compliant with labor standards. We ensure that we are compliant also with international judicial precedent. We make every effort as a country to ensure that we are compliant with the standards of the international organizations or international conventions and treaties to which we have signed and then ensured afterwards that we have ratified by domesticating it into our own national laws. With regard to the IMO, that in 2018 was not the case. I have lost count between 2018 and now of the number of pieces of legislation on maritime matters that this government has brought through this chamber. We first started out by bringing on Barbados's very first Director of Maritime Affairs, and I want to single her out here now with your permission, Mr. President. She's a young woman who, at the time, had just completed her master's in maritime law in Malta, another small state that had been well known for maritime law advances. She had just completed her studies at the time when I first met her, even before she became director. She was interested in teaching and she wanted to bring the skills that she amassed in the IMO and at the University of Malta to the University of the West Indies in the law faculty. Her pathways converged, I believe. I remember introducing her at the time to Minister Humphrey. And the rest is history. extraordinarily bright young woman. She subsequently joined the team in Maritime Affairs, and it has been to her credit that Barbados has produced one of the most comprehensive suites of legislation in maritime affairs in our history. And most specifically, it has been to her credit that we have now been brought into compliance with the requirements of the International Maritime Organization. We have seen item after item come under maritime law, and really all of them have been as a consequence of there being an obligation on the state to introduce a series of pieces of legislation, all constituting the suite that we refer to now, to ensure that Barbados is compliant with the IMO in ways that it is compliant with every other international organization and every other convention and treaty to which we are signed. So now, what is this particular piece of legislation, or these two pieces of legislation, about? And I want to go through them in some detail. In the first instance, Mr. President, the Seafarers Suite of laws contain one bill in the first instance and 16 pieces of regulations. In the first instance, you have the principal bill, which is the Seafarers Bill, and then there are the 16 regulations which cover a range of things. Seafarers standards of training, certification, and watchkeeping regulations, assessment and certifications, minimum age, medical certification, employment, wages, from occupational health and safety, and so on. Now, why is this important? You even have things relating to, in health, maritime doctors and nurses. You have those things. These are all regulations. And why is this, Mr. President? Why is this important for a country like Barbados? Well, one, as the Honourable Deputy President will tell you, Barbados's marine space is 400 times larger than our land space. And our ocean space is what Prime Minister Motley has announced to the rest of the world. We are a large ocean state, even if we are a small island state. And so these regulations are important, but we speak about COVID a lot. And I'm convinced, certainly having sat in the role of chair of the port during COVID, and then subsequently Minister of Tourism during COVID, when we talk about seafarers, people think, oh, who are these people? My grandfather was a seaman. I have an uncle who was a seaman. And we remember that there was a generation in this country of seamen. They went to sea for 8 months at a time, 9 months at a time. They worked on the ships, cargo ships, sailed the high seas, went to countries far-flung, and came back home with salaries and wages that supported their families here in Barbados. We are also a seafaring nation by history. But also in COVID, closer to us now, we remember when we see those ships down in the Bridgetown port, whether they're cargo ships or cruise ships, we see the passengers that get off. We see the big litter of the ships, and we see the passengers walking through Bridgetown on their bikes, depending on what the vessel is, and they're walking through the stores and the shops. But if there are 3,000 passengers on one of those cruise ships, for example, trust and believe that there are approximately 1,500, almost 2,000 crew members working on those same ships. Those are the people that we call seafarers. They work on our cruise ships. They work on our cargo ships. Those are the people that we're talking about. And these pieces of legislation, in particular the regulations, assign to them the rights and obligations to employers that we enjoy in land-based employment. Quite simply put, if I work in a shop and we know that there's a Safety and Health at Work Act, this legislation, specifically the regulations, particularly the one that speaks about occupational health and safety, that gives them the same rights on board a ship. That's as simply as I can put it. If you are a lady and you become pregnant, you have a family at home and you're expecting, this legislation in the regulations speaks about seafarers, pregnancy and maternity regulations. Very simple. The same things that you have available to you in your regular employment on a land-based environment must equally be applicable to you under the IMO in your sea-based work environment. That's as simple as I can break it down for you. Identity documents. But equally, one of the things that's important here is to ensure that we are able to protect our seafarers. And I talked about COVID earlier for a reason. Anybody remembers, Mr. President, what it was like to read news stories of ships stranded at sea, not being able to come to port, not being accepted by countries, being turned around, not just passengers, but seafarers, because even though countries like Barbados would have allowed for over 22,000 or so passengers to be evacuated through this country to go home to their families, people tend to forget that long after those passengers leave that ship, there are people who have to remain on board to work on that ship until they're cleared. Those are the seafarers that we're trying to protect. And if any country in the world can imagine what it is to protect people on a ship, it is this country. And I'm so proud that this legislation and its accompanying regulations are before us here today. So what is the Maritime Labour Convention that we're referring to more generally, and what the Seafarers Convention specifically relating to? It seeks to ensure that we cater to the physical, mental, and social well-being of seafarers for their entire lifetime, but most specifically, how they're treated while on board the ship. It establishes shipboard regulations, minimum requirements to work on a ship, conditions of employment, shipboard living and working arrangements, including accommodation, recreational facilities, food and catering, health protection, medical care, welfare and social security protection. Imagine you are at home and you could call in sick because you won't go to your doctor because you're not feeling well. And you go to your doctor down the road there in Bridgetown. You go in the doctor's office and the doctor says, no, Lisa, you're not feeling good. You're really not feeling well. There's something happening with you. You need to take some time off from work. And I'm going to give you a sick paper. Take that to your employer so you can get some time off from work until you recover. Or you have a contagious illness. You can't be at work because you'll make others unwell. You need to stay home. A ship worker, a seafarer on board a ship, can't go down the road to their doctor, their regular doctor, their GP. They have to have medical capabilities on board that ship, which they always do. And they have to be able to be entitled to the same time off from work to recover from illness that we in our regular work environment are eligible for. And so these are the kinds of things, real world, real life things that we take for granted, but don't necessarily think about in other environments. So how do you ensure compliance and enforcement? These are the kinds of things that are here. So Barbados is putting forward this suite of legislation, the principal bill, which I've mentioned, and the accompanying regulations in order to, one, ensure the implementation in compliance with the IMO requirements of the International Convention on Standards of Training, Certification, and Watchkeeping for Seafarers. This is a 1978 piece of legislation. To ensure the implementation of the Maritime Labour Convention of 2006, to ensure a framework to support continued improvement and development of the Barbados seafarer sector, and I'll come to that in a minute, and to ensure the highest possible standards of protection for seafarers. Now, Mr. President, I talked about us historically having seamen. I talked about my grandfather and one of my uncles having been seamen. We talked about the persons who work on board the ships and the cruise vessels. But, Mr. President, when we talk about what Barbados aims to do and by way of a framework to have a seafaring sector, I want to take us in a different direction. Every year, we see advertising in the newspaper and in collaboration with the Barbados Tourism Marketing, Inc. at times and the Ministry of Labour, ships in particular coming to have job fairs. They're recruiting Barbadians to go and work on ships. But these are ships that are going to leave Barbados' shores and travel the rest of the globe in international waters outside of Barbados' jurisdiction. They're nationals, but they're under the jurisdiction of sometimes no one, really. And so we want to make sure under a global framework, the IMO framework, that there are protections for our own citizens when they are on board a ship. You see, when there was hantavirus, a few weeks ago, months ago now, there was this outbreak of hantavirus on board a ship. There was this conversation globally about where the ship was going to go, if it was going to go, if it was going to be allowed in, what was going to happen. And then individual countries started to send evacuation plans for their nationals, to take their nationals home, and they took responsibility for their nationals. How do you, if you are a small state like Barbados, send to bring your nationals? We may send a Moses, as is being whispered here, to bring your nationals home. I remember vividly one Sunday morning, a vessel was here and there was COVID on it. And there were Barbadians who had been working on that ship. Mercifully, we were the country at the time receiving the ship. It was not elsewhere. And I remember they did not come to shore, Mr. President, on a Moses. They came to shore they tendered ashore. You know, one of those smaller boats, and it's covered, and they come to shore. And I remember the port that morning calling me to say, Chair, as I was at the time, this ship has some Barbadians who are working on board. They need to be able to be evacuated from the vessel. They're going to come home because there's nowhere for them to go. But we don't have anywhere to bring the ship in. That ship stayed offshore that morning, and we had to tender ashore by the Coast Guard. You know where the Coast Guard base is. And their families, after being at sea for 8 months, their families could not go to receive them. You know, we like when people coming back and they're gone for a long time, you go to the airport, you see them, you're excited, and everybody comes with balloons and flowers, welcome back home. That couldn't happen. It was COVID. And I remember that morning, I left my house and I went to the Coast Guard. And I went there with other members of the port team to receive those. There were 5 young men. They came off of that boat, that tender, in full PPE, covered from head to toe in these white suits. And they carried their suitcases and their bags that they had with them on board that ship. And no one could go and assist them. I watched those young men get off, musicians in most instances, get off of that ship, full PPE, struggling to bring their suitcases, heavy suitcases, 8 months at sea, off that ship so that they could come home. And they went from that Coast Guard base, intel facility for isolation until they could be cleared to come home. That's what countries who are evacuating their nationals on board a ship elsewhere will do for their own, and how they will do it. We want to make sure that any Barbadian national, wherever they are in the world, is always treated with the dignity that must be afforded to them, whoever is assisting them. And so we subscribe to these international conventions for that reason. We subscribe to these regulations for that reason. Those guys were coming home. But we want to make sure that someone else, somewhere else, whether it is in the Netherlands or anywhere else where that MV Hondius was, in the case of hantavirus or any other virus on board a ship, that these people can find safe harbor. And that some nation state will receive them and make sure that they're safely evacuated back home. So this convention has 2 parts. Well, there are a couple of parts, and I want to go through the parts very quickly. But first, to put in context, Barbados we do have a registry. I don't want to get past that just yet. We have a ship's registry. So we have seafarers, and we also have ships which bear the Barbados flag. That ship's registry is actually based out of our High Commission in London. And it is considered what we call an open registry. And it means that it is open to ships that may come from all nations, but they may choose to be registered in Barbados. That's no different than our global business sector, where companies may choose to domicile in Barbados. Equally so, ships choose to carry Barbados's flag. That's really just as simple as it is. And so these member states, like Barbados, that maintain a registry, are usually under quite a bit of scrutiny, because there is a sense that just like with global business and companies coming to domicile, that persons willing to or engage in illegal activity are looking for a flag to hide behind. And so Barbados has had to put a number of arrangements in place to ensure that flags of convenience, which is a term that they typically use, is not something that happens to ships bearing Barbados's name. And so it is important that we maintain a flag of confidence status, as opposed to a flag of convenience status. And that happens as a result of Barbados ensuring that our maritime laws align with international law and standards relating to seafarers. So that's really where this legislation is going. So we have a few things. The Maritime Labour Convention, in the first instance, this suite of laws for seafarers, protects persons irrespective of nationality on board Barbados registered vessels. It ensures that seafarers irrespective of nationality serving on board foreign registered vessels in Barbados' waters fall under what we call port state control. It allows that Barbadian seafarers, our own people working on any vessel, whether they are Barbados registered or not, that they are governed by the international rules for labor supply and state control. So that's where these clauses come in. And so you see in clause 2, if I can get into the specific clauses of the bill, it defines who a seafarer is. It talks about where they're employed, how they're engaged, what they're doing on board a vessel, and it goes on to give a detailed definition. It also goes on, and I want to bring your attention to the living standards and working conditions. That's captured in clauses 32 through 41. And then we have in 42 through 78, it talks about the minimum requirements for seafarers to work on board the ship, and that includes things like basic competencies. They must not be under the age of 18, that would be underage labor. They must be certified medically fit for shipboard work, and they must be registered under the National Insurance and Safety and Security Scheme, those kinds of things, and they must maintain a national identity document. Then we go on to part 4 of the bill, which talks about things relating to medical certification standards of training. Part 4 also speaks about public and private maritime training providers, including seafarer recruitment and recruitment agencies. That's on purpose, that I spoke earlier about the number of job fairs that we host here in Barbados, and the accreditation that is under the IMO regulations that are required. Then further in part 4, having gone on to talking a little bit more about what the recruitment must look like, you sometimes see these scams, what people call scams, where people are saying, well, you want to apply for a job, you have to pay this fee up front. This legislation in these regulations manages that process, and it says very precisely, you shall not impose either directly or indirectly a fee or other charge on a seafarer for recruitment or placement, or for providing employment to the seafarer. So it puts those things in place and penalizes persons who breach them. Then in part 5, clauses 79 through 168, it talks about the actual conditions. So you go on, you apply for the job, you get the job, now you have conditions of employment. What are those things? You must have clear terms and conditions of employment set out in a legally enforceable contract. You must know people's full name, date of birth. So John Blow, we call him Kadi. No, you must have a full name. What is the ship owner's address? The capacity in which he is to be employed, what are his wages or the formula to calculate those wages, how much annual leave is he or she entitled to, and the conditions for terminating their employment based on that written agreement. Then it goes on to talk about things like health and self-help and social security benefits to be provided, maximum portion of the voyage or the engagement, how many persons must constitute the crew on a given ship, and those are among the things that are captured in Section 5. The regulations that I mentioned earlier are augmented by, there are, 6 sets of specific regulations relevant to Part 5 of the legislation. Those regulations relate to employment, wages, hours of work and rest, repatriation, getting people home, safe manning, and identity documents. And then as we go through the legislation, we come to Section 30 of the Facilitation of the International Maritime Traffic Act, which talks about shore leave. So shore leave means when a ship comes ashore, can they get off of the vessel? Are they able to be entitled to a set time off that ship when the ship comes ashore, or must they stay on board? So those are among the things that are captured in the legislation. I want, having gone through this particular piece of the legislation in Part 6, now clauses 169 to 199, it outlines things like, that we take for granted, shipboard accommodation, recreational facilities, If you're home, you could decide, I'm going to a cruise, I'm going to church, I'm going to a restaurant, and I know what my recreational facilities are. If you're on board a ship for 8 months, what are your recreational facilities like? What food is available to you? Catering for seafarers, all of those things are captured in this legislation because unlike us, they can't leave their place of home and work to go and recreate. Everything is all in one. So those are among the things in that section. In Part 7 of the legislation, it talks about ensuring that there's prompt medical care for persons who become ill on board the vessel. That's necessary, and that they are protected from the financial consequences of sickness, injury, or even death. What are the obligations when these things happen and they're on board the vessel? And Part 7, as I just mentioned, is supported by 2 specific regulations of the ones that I spoke about earlier, 1 of employment and 2, the occupational health and safety. In Part 8, then, it's about compliance and enforcement, making sure that all of the things that I have just outlined are enforceable and that ships are then able to comply with them. So these are the principal elements under the first bill in this cognate debate, the Seafarers Bill, the 1 bill, and the 16 pieces of regulations that are accompanying it. That brings me to the second bill in this debate, Mr. President, which is the Maritime Areas Jurisdiction and Rights Bill. This is also part of a suite of laws relating to the coordination and regulation of activities within the purview of the coastal state control. So there's a term that I used earlier in the Seafarers Bill that is particularly relevant in the Maritime Areas Jurisdiction and Rights Bill, called Port State Control. What is Port State Control? The ministry with responsibility for maritime affairs, in this instance, the ministry with responsibility now for international transport, is what we call Port State Control. International transport has within it the directorate. The young officer that I started out by referencing and giving kudos to, her name is Miss Najla King. With your permission, I'd like to acknowledge and recognize her. When she started out as a maritime officer. She is today now the Director of Maritime Affairs, and she manages a small unit that produces all of this work. That agency, that entity internal to international transport is responsible for what we call port state control. They manage everything relating to ships coming and going, including local vessels. And so maritime regulatory oversight falls within 3 main categories. Flag state control. Remember, I spoke about Barbados being a ship's registry. So flag state represents the jurisdiction of the state where the ship is registered. If it is a Barbados registered ship, then we are the flag state. If it is a U.S. registered ship, a Cayman, Bahamas, those are some of the countries, Malta, that are large ships registries, they constitute what we would call the flag state. If you are port state refers to the jurisdiction of the state where a seaport is located, at which ships, irrespective of nationality, call. So a Barbados flagged ship can call on the port in Bahamas. And Bahamas becomes the port state under control, but Barbados remains the flag state. Then you have the coastal state control, and this is the jurisdiction of the state in whose waters where shipping and non-shipping ocean-based activities are taking place. So that's really the 3 main areas, and again, under the IMO, we are making sure that we are now compliant with these rules. So against this backdrop specifically, there is an act called the Maritime and Underwater Heritage Act of 2025. And this legislation is being seen as a sister legislation to that piece of legislation. And in 2024, this is when this started, we had the Maritime Underwater and Heritage Bill that entered into force and passed through this place in January of 2025. And it focused specifically on the aspects of shipping that enable or facilitate other sectors like marine bioprospecting, deep sea mineral mining, and underwater cultural heritage exploration. So this is really where we're going, and really it's because conventional shipping no longer applies to just conventional cargo or cruise shipping. You've got special purpose shipping now as a critical sector in shipping. And this refers to a range of things like oil and gas and mineral exploration, mining and recovery, activities directed at marine biological diversity, marine renewable energy, deep ocean research, just to name a few. And I think if many of us have been following the ministry with responsibility for environment and natural beautification, you would have seen that Barbados has been involved in an extensive process of the marine spatial plan that has been underway. That's happening, and there's been a vessel here in Barbados for the longest time. It was meant to be here for 9 months, I think is a period, and they were here for the purpose of mapping out what our marine spatial area looks like and everything underneath. So that's an example of modern shipping in ways that go well beyond cargo and cruise vessels. So those areas must occur only in adherence with the maritime jurisdictional rights regime established under what we call UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, 1982 in particular. And really, UNCLOS is the baseline of the bill that we're debating today, specifically the Maritime Areas Jurisdiction and Rights Bill. So the primary objective of the bill is to establish a robust legal regime for maritime areas in our country. It defines the extent of the state's sovereignty and jurisdiction. It facilitates the sustainable management of marine resources and incorporates international standards for the protection of marine diversity. It also integrates the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction into local law. And what do I mean by all of that fancy footwork, Mr. President? I want to try and keep it as simple as I can. When I was a young undergrad student studying international relations and diplomacy at the Mona campus of the University of the West Indies, and as a proud Irvinite, I say that for some of the colleagues in here. One of my favorite courses in first year, taught by Professor Stephen Vassiani, was public international law. And that was when I first developed a love of public international law, and in particular law of the sea. And I always remember when he talked about what was the way in which he described what is national jurisdiction, what is extraterritorial jurisdiction, where are the national waters, 12-mile zone, 15-mile zone, the EEZ beyond there for the purposes of exclusive economic development, what the continental shelf was, where international waters began, and those kinds of things. And so this legislation that we're talking about today is very heavily built on UNCLOS, the United Nations Law of the Sea Convention, and also the agreement that I spoke about just now, conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity. So in the legislation, as I get into this, the weeds now of the actual legislation, clauses 5 through 14 outline the administrative framework of the bill, and it outlines the responsibilities and portfolios of the various ministries in relation to activities under the bill. And what are those institutional frameworks? I mentioned maritime affairs. They're responsible for the overall overarching policy and maritime regulation consistent with international law. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, specifically Foreign Affairs, is responsible in this section of legislation for the negotiation of maritime boundaries, the delimitation with neighboring states, and international treaty compliance. We have the Ministry with responsibility for national security, maritime domain awareness, border protection. You also have the Ministry with responsibility for environment, pollution prevention, and so on. And then we here in 2024 passed the establishment of the Barbados Maritime Transport Administration, set up under the Ministry with responsibility for international transport, and they are responsible for all of the IMO-related oversight activities. So we're talking about marine spaces, but in the legislation it talks about space affairs. And this is regulated here largely by the entity in government normally that would deal with those things. So I've already outlined the various ways in which shipping has evolved. And the Honourable Deputy President, Madam Deputy President is here. And I remember being a young officer in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I'm not looking left, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs at the time, a Foreign Service Officer 2. And there was I wasn't even FSO 1 yet, I was FSO 2. And there was a Minister of Environment at the time who would have presided, as it was then, over the demarcation of the first offshore blocks for oil discovery. She sits in this chamber as the minister with responsibility for environment. So I just want to remind the public, when they talk about sudden discoveries of oil, that it was the Honourable Deputy President of this chamber as Minister of Environment who first presided over the now and the then discovery of offshore oil. And it was the Prime Minister, the then Attorney General, who would have presided over the maritime delimitation of boundaries between Barbados and Trinidad to be able to have that demarcation very clearly defined under UNCLOS and with the International Court of Justice in the Arbitral Tribunal. So this is not something that Barbados has just discovered. This is not something that, as was once said by a former minister, could have been negotiated over a bowl of soup. Far from it. We spent time at the Arbitral Tribunal under the leadership of the then Attorney General and now Prime Minister, and we demarcated those blocks under the then Minister of Environment, and Barbados is now at a position where we are engaging in the direct negotiations of those long-held blocks for offshore oil. So this legislation covers the governance mechanism that surrounds activities such as that as well. And it defines in Part 4 what maritime zones exist. Internal waters, Clause 24 outlines what that is. The territorial sea, those first 12 nautical miles that I mentioned, which constitute Barbados' territorial sea in accordance with the rules of UNCLOS, where Barbados has full sovereignty. Airspace, water column, seabed, subsoil within the territorial sea maritime zone. The contiguous zone, clauses 30 through 32, defined, but we have some very limited rights under UNCLOS, as I said, and the exclusive economic zone, clauses 33 through 39, establishes and outlines Barbados' EEZ regime that is pursuant to Article 57 of UNCLOS, and that's a 200 nautical mile zone. And it is in this area that Barbados has sovereign rights, the ones that I talked about, that under the then Attorney General, the now Prime Minister, we went to the Arbitral Tribunal for maritime delimitation to be able to give Barbados those sovereign rights to be able to do a few things. And what are those things? The exploration, utilization, conservation, protection, management of the natural living and non-living resources of the seabed, subsoil and adjacent waters, energy production from water, currents, and winds, establishment and use of offshore islands, installations, and structures, as well as the authorization and regulation of the construction, operation, maintenance, or use of structures or devices relating to exploration and utilization of the resources of the EEZ, the regulation and safety of shipping, or any other economic purpose. This is the way in which the legislation is shaped in UNCLOS, in this legislation, to be able to govern Barbados' economic activities in the exclusive economic zone. Then you have the continental shelf captured in clauses 40 through 45 of the bill, and it establishes our continental shelf regime. It allows us, equally, same discussion on offshore oil, to explore, utilize, conserve, protect, and manage natural resources on or contained in the continental shelf. Resources in the shelf include oil, gas, minerals, and diverse mineral life. Construct and maintain or use offshore islands, offshore terminals, installations, structures, and devices necessary for the exploration and utilization of the resources of the shelf, shipping, or any other economic purpose. It also covers marine scientific research. But then it establishes a critical and an important relationship between the two zones of economic development. That 200-mile zone, which is captured as Clause 34.2, and then the EEZ, which is the 200 nautical mile zone and the continental shelf. That is captured in Clauses 34 all the way through Clauses 34.2 as well. And then it speaks about Clause 33.1, what is in the seabed and the subsoil underneath. If I were to then come to clause 42 of the bill, it talks about establishment of Barbados' continental shelf beyond the 200 nautical miles that I spoke about, and it is consistent with the recommendations issued to Barbados coming out of that 2012 decision by the United Nations Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf. And so, Mr. President, Barbados is establishing in this legislation clear, unequivocal international maritime rules which govern our operation in the maritime space. It is with respect to foreign ships, it is with respect to flag state ships, it is with respect to coastal flag ships, Mr. President, and as we go through, it gives also a high seas regime which is beyond that 200 nautical mile zone in clauses 46 through 48 of the bill, and it allows for a few things. You can do certain things in the first 12 miles, is yours, territorial sea. You can do certain things in the EEZ, because that's also yours for economic purposes. But on the high seas, the legislation before us guarantees a few things. Freedom of navigation. You cannot stop anybody on the high seas from having freedom of navigation. Freedom of overflight, freedom to lay submarine cables and pipelines, freedom to construct offshore islands and other installations permitted under international law, freedom of fishing, that has its own regulations and under things like the International Whaling Commission and so on, but subject to the interests of other states in the exercise of their freedom to fish on the high seas. And Barbados typically takes a position on things relating to fishing on the high seas, largely because you've got these large trawlers that come onto the high seas, but they're doing long line fishing, and they leave their trawlers down, and they draw from in your EEZ and beyond, and they take up everything underneath the seabed to be able to fish, and that's something that entities like the International Whaling Commission has been attempting to regulate, as well as under the International Seabed Authority. Clause 47 outlines the case for maritime safety, security, and environmental protection, and Clause 48 goes into greater detail, as do Clauses 49 and 50. It does establish also a series of maritime zones to allow for these regulations to take effect, and it is under Clauses 57 and 64 that the link between climate resilience and sovereignty is established. And so, Mr. President, these are the two bills that are under consideration and I hope can be passed today with the support of this honourable chamber. It establishes Barbados, one, in the first instance, as a country that has come a long way from 2018 out of compliance with the International Maritime Organization, now into compliance with our international obligations under the IMO, the related obligations under the ILO, the International Labour Organization, the rights that have been assigned to us under UNCLOS, United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and the two maritime conventions that I've spoken about, specifically on conservation and maritime diversity. It also brings Barbados into conformity with those things at an international level. But domestically and nationally, it establishes Barbados as a seafaring state, protecting our nationals wherever they are in the world, on whosever ship they are, but also establishing Barbados' reputation as a flag of substance, a flag state with a ship's registry that is not a flag of convenience, and to ensure that Barbados has the mechanisms in place internationally to subscribe to the rules that will govern this space. And I beg to move, Mr. President, that this bill on this basis benefit from the support of the chamber and that it be read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Cummings. Any speakers on this bill?
Liz, you must.
Her Honor, the Most Honourable Henrietta Elizabeth Thompson.
Well, clearly today, sir, is the day that our names are being put out there. Truthfully, sir, I had not intended to speak on this, but I would like to thank the Honourable Leader of Government Business for her graciousness in remembering that work was done before we got to the point at which we are now. You know, I laugh because...
And bear witness to that scene of great originality and work, I confirm what the leader said. I compliment you on the great work you did as Minister of Environment in relation to law of the sea matters.
Thank you so much. It is actually a particular area of mine because one of my masters is in this particular area, so that For me, it was great enjoyment. It was an opportunity to add value to national life, to carry Barbados into a new greenfield area for us in terms of investment, as well as for me to use a skill set that I had opted to train in. You know, God is amazing. When I chose to do a master's in oil and gas law policy with a subspecialty in renewable energy law and policy, people looked at me like if I was crazy, and I actually had people ask me, but why would you want to do that? Because at that time, there was absolutely no indication that we had any serious resources offshore, and it certainly wasn't being explored. As we moved toward exploration and so on, later on, the training that I had, this very specialized training that I had, then became very useful. So to frame the context, sir, of this issue beyond myself, I want to recognize all of our nationals who worked at that time in bringing us to the point where this administration could move quickly. And it is regrettable that we had such a long lag in the efforts that could and should have been made for Barbados in this regard. We used a homegrown team of Barbadians led at the time by two specialists, and I seek your permission to call their names. Harvald Snarvold, a Norwegian, who was a geological specialist and working particularly in the oil and gas field, who helped tremendously with the demarcation of the maritime boundaries and the bid blocks that we defined. And then Jonathan Green, who is a European national, who, as it turns out, is married to a Barbadian. And he too had considerable experience in oil and gas, and they were the people who, the core of the international team, who joined with the Barbadian team to ensure that Barbados' national interests were protected. And you may say, well, protected from what? But let us understand that the people who negotiate in oil and gas companies do this for a living. They have very specialized skill sets. They work in teams that are larger than our ministries in these regions. And because they have tremendous experience, they are able to negotiate better deals for the companies than we are able to negotiate for our nationals. And you see it repeatedly when you look at oil and gas regimes across developing countries and what the countries with the resources actually get versus what these companies get. In fact, I don't even know that some of the developing countries which attempt to use their well-meaning but unskilled nationals, and I say unskilled, not that they aren't trained professionals, but unskilled in this area of expertise, that there is a particular software that the oil and gas uses to compute margins of cents and fractions of cents to determine what their profit margins are. Now, you go into a negotiation and you don't know that this software is being used on you, and the numbers seem right to you, but then you really don't recognize how much you are losing because you don't have the expertise. You don't even know that this software exists. You in your innocence. So it is an extremely specialized area. But I'm very glad that we have gone back to the table and that we are now again engaging. To speak about these areas, sir, and I want to frame this in broad context. It is critical as we go on to determine how we are going to language our interests between being an oil and gas jurisdiction and the climate advocacy, which has been an international leadership position that we have taken. Because you can be sure that there is bound to be criticism as to what appears to be a conflict of interest in the development of national policy that supports both oil and gas while appearing to be a major climate advocate. And therefore, the languaging of this, the pursuit of policy frameworks which are still highly protective of the marine environment. And this legislation actually signals that Barbados is intent, whatever else it does, in protecting its marine environment, the biodiversity to be found in our marine environment, and those persons who make a living from maritime activity, whether it is fishing, sir, or any other maritime activity. My rent to Mr.
I know.
So this really is going to be a very important consideration for us. In that regard, I would want to signal that we have to ensure, and it was part of the original drafting of the policy framework, that Barbadians should be able to have an interest, a financial interest in the bid blocks, and that government would hold for citizens a national sovereign fund and allow citizens to put up small monies. They didn't have to be big investors to protect their, to place investments in the bid blocks, and that government was going to protect their interests by ensuring that the benefits were passed on to them. So if they invested in a bid block, which at the end of the day did not have the kind of yields that were expected, the citizen interest would have been protected and the government would have taken the loss. So we didn't want people putting up money that they would lose. So that, I think that is still an important policy approach, so that ordinary Barbadians, all Barbadians, because I don't like sometimes to use this expression, ordinary Barbadians, all Barbadians, whoever they are, can feel free to make an investment in the national interest and in their children's future in this regard. And we have been, in the course of the manifesto, talking about various types of funds, whether it is for youth, whether it is sovereign funds, as investment for citizens, and this is another area in which opportunity exists. So I think it is extremely important for us to maintain that as our policy position. I wish to caution, sir, in fact, it was one of the things on which I did my dissertation, this whole issue of resource curse, oil and gas curse, as it is so frequently called. One observes, sir, a number of features in greenfield jurisdictions, oil and gas jurisdictions. One, that the benefits of the revenues being generated and the benefits of the considerable profits that can be earned do not inure to the benefit of the wider citizen. One. Second, that there are often changes in the dynamics of the economy because of the entry of oil and gas. Let me explain. The oil and gas sector tends to pay higher wages than other sectors. Hence, a blue-collar worker or an engineer who may be working, let's say, at the cement plant, or a blue-collar worker who may go to NCC for a job, would figure they can earn more money if they go and work with one of the companies in the oil and gas sector. And indeed they can. So what you have is a migration of labor from the broader economy over to the oil and gas sector. And you have it with people, both skilled and unskilled labor, from several other areas of enterprise moving from those areas into the oil and gas sector. So you see a skewing of labor and a skewing of the market. The presence of those increased revenues within the marketplace also means that you are creating a cash-rich cohort of individuals. You saw it happen in Trinidad, where the south of Trinidad developed significantly. People built massive houses. There was no relationship between what was happening in South Trinidad and the rest of Trinidad because the oil economy was driving the south. And then you saw it then start to impact adversely the broader economy as you move north and east of Trinidad and so on. But I'm saying Trinidad, but they're not alone. You could go to any developing country and look at what happened in the marketplace, and you will see that the country has become rich in terms of its GDP, but the individuals have not. The citizens have not. Their situations have not improved. And then you have, in large countries, these are offshore, where you had gas exploration. Onshore, you had pollution in certain areas, the lives of tongues being upended. In fact, that is being seen in Canada and the US, and Canada because of the development of the oil sands, and in the United States from fracking, where you have very, very serious environmental damage and towns, the lives of people living in particular towns being completely transformed, and not always for the better, from the presence of the oil and gas sector. So that this investment comes with socioeconomic risks of which the government has to be aware and start to take preventive steps very early on to make sure that Dutch disease, which is what the phenomenon of which I'm speaking, what it is usually called, to ensure that we are not the victims of Dutch disease. So mechanisms have to be found from a very early time to ensure that the benefits of the sector reach all Barbadians, and equally to ensure that we do not allow our macroeconomic fundamentals to be skewed in a negative way by the influx of petrodollars into the economy. This is part of what managing the resource. We don't have to look very far to see how a country that has not so long ago got an influx of oil and gas into their economy, but when you look at what is happening on the ground, you are not seeing macro transformation of the lives of the poor, which is really what government needs to be able to do with these kinds of resources. So I am raising these issues while I celebrate the opportunity in caution of the risks that lie before us. Because so often you deal with two heads of a coin, one that has potential beneficial impacts and one that has potential adverse impacts. And how you flip it, how you turn it, what you do with that coin becomes critical to what the outcome and the future is, and whether your investment yields the kind of long-term benefits that you want it to. There are opportunities in the oil and gas sector for people to be trained in new specialist fields, to diversify and open up the economy. It also attracts some negative and unsavory types, but it equally attracts international business investment. People who come to invest in oil and gas will also make other investments in the country. So it opens up the country for further investment, which is of importance to us at this time as we seek to diversify our economy, to create new jobs and new opportunities, bring new skill sets or to train, thank you, or to train our nationals in new skills. I trust that having then spoken to how I see this legislation in the context of the oil and gas sector, sir, has been helpful, but I am really very grateful to see how it will develop. And I want to say to young people that sometimes you want to train in areas and people try to dissuade you. You never know what opportunities are going to come your way. After I did my training, I was not able to work on oil and gas, but I discovered by accident that I was the only person trained in oil and gas law and policy, because clearly you would have had engineers and so, between Trinidad and Jamaica. There was nobody else in the Eastern Caribbean who had that kind of specialist training. So when we lost the government in 2008, sir, I found that people were turning up and asking me to do things in energy related, and I worked throughout the Caribbean doing energy related things in a way that I had not at all even recognized that the opportunity existed. So sometimes we have to give our young people their wings, and they will not fly immediately, but the right wind will come that will allow them to soar. I would want, sir, to make some other observations relative to the broad legislation. I start by noting that the legislation goes into the celestial spaces. It speaks to, the word celestial is not used, I am using the language, yes, I'm using the language, I wouldn't say from mischief, but playfully. But it does speak to non-terrestrial, extraterrestrial type of activity. And I wonder if maritime legislation is really the appropriate place for this. But it is an area that we have to watch. It is an area that we have to watch because the use of engineering to address climate impacts is becoming increasingly talked about. The area of geoengineering, of solar radiation modification, where people are now using cloud brightening and other cloud technology to see if they can lower the Earth's atmosphere, is an important new area that we are not paying enough attention to here in the Caribbean, but which could emerge in the future, especially when you consider that this year is supposed to be a super El Nino and is expected to bring extreme heat temperatures to our region in particular, which will impact the elderly, youth, maternal and child health, all of those people who work out of doors. Now, the point of this is that those persons who are proponents of these technologies are going to press even further for the acceleration of the use of these technologies in the global landscape. And we have to be cognizant of it. We have to have legislation that deals with it. We have to have skill sets for our people to address it. But most of all, sir, and I have to admit that it is a matter to which I have been paying attention and have had the opportunity to serve on different international committees, we have to be conscious of what the international governance and regulatory regimes are going to be. Because these technologies, nobody knows what will happen when they are deployed. And they are going to come to regions exactly like ours to deploy the technologies. So if we do not have governance frameworks and legislation which protects us in these situations, then we could find ourselves in a very difficult place. Only maybe 2 weeks ago, sir, a group out of Australia came to see me. I did not even know that they're using a similar technology to the solar radiation modification and the geoengineering to create mass clouds, and I use clouds in inverted commas as a non-specialist. Similar, sir, you know when you go and you see fogging, when we do fogging for insects. So this is, these are clouds of that sort, which are created, they don't have any harmful chemicals like the fogging technologies. I think we still use malathion, if my memory is correct. But they go out to sea and they create these clouds, which rather than being skyborne, sit over the ocean for miles and miles. And they are using it, sir, to block certain solar rays from reaching the underwater. And that is an aspect for ocean cooling and reef protection that is now being explored in a context where we are talking about warming sea levels and the implication for marine biodiversity. So it is critical, simple as the legislation looks, or somebody might say, well, surely when I got other priorities. There are things going on out there. There are developments at the global level which can have very, very serious impacts on us. And therefore, legislation of this type will allow us to be protected in the event that someone comes, well, indeed, the company that came was offering the technology to Barbados. Would we be willing to be a test bed? Would we be willing to partner with various countries and private sector entities as this is explored? Technology changes, technology evolves. Some of it to be used to great good, some of it does not have the impact that we expect. Earlier in the debate, there was conversation about the GLP-1 drugs. We remember all these babies that turned up with defects because the thalidomide in the marketplace and the consequence of that. Technology. So we will see what happens with these technologies, but the point is that we now have some kind of legislative framework to address them. My other concern about the legislation is the fact that it is driven in many instances not by an underpinning development let me reframe this to see if I can better make the point. You can put legislation in place that is enabling, as I mentioned earlier in the day in relation to another piece of legislation. The legislation then becomes an instrument of social engineering. Or you can put legislation in place which is solely to govern and regulate. It is not developmental. This legislation appears to me to be largely regulatory and governance related, but it's not developmental. And I really believe that we have to start looking at how we can use our legislative capabilities to really develop the maritime sector, not just use legislation to protect what we have in place. So that is just a point that I would wish to make. The legislation also significantly expands the work of a number of named ministries and agencies. Earlier in the day, the point was made legitimately, or was it? I can't remember. It was made in my head. I can't remember if it was made on the floor. That I think I did make it actually in relation to Pearlie. Yes. That we have, when we create these new things, to ask ourselves, how many bodies do we need? What skill sets do we need? How do we deploy resources? What level of maintenance, upkeep, and follow-up is required? What duties, new duties, does the legislation or do pieces of legislation impose on ministries, because we are very bad at the implementation of legislation in Barbados. There are all kinds of laws on the statute books that when somebody says, well, why don't you pass a law to do so and so? Oh, that already exists. We just don't implement it. We don't police it. We do not have maritime police in Barbados. And therefore, if we are going to have a piece of legislation that is so long, has so many sections, imposes so many additional duties of a different type on already existing and busy officers, then we are setting ourselves up for another piece of legislation that will not be implemented. We have to have the human resource capacities and invest in them every time we create new legislation of this type, to add duties and responsibilities to ministries. Otherwise, you are just frustrating officers, because in essence, they have the legislation, but they truly do not have the tools to do the job or the bodies to do the job. So I would wish to caution that as we add this new legislation, good, useful, necessary, and creative though it might be, that the follow-up for the human resource and other capabilities that are necessary for effective effective implementation. I shouldn't say enactment, because the enactment process is simple. For effective implementation is absolutely critical and must not be omitted. I turn then, sir, to the area of deep sea mining. Already applications have been made. Well, let me go back. The International Seabed Authority has responsibility for this area. It is headquartered in Jamaica. When the last Director General was in place, there was a keenness on the part of the organization to allow international deep sea bed mining, particularly in an area of the Pacific, a huge area of the Pacific, even in the absence of any proper legislative or regulatory framework. The ISA is discussing such a framework, and there are draft rules in place, but nothing has been finalized. Despite that, American companies have applied directly to the United States government to carry out deep sea mining in the waters of the Pacific. There is an argument that there is a level of biodiversity, even at very deep, what's the word, noun I want? Even in the very deep, in the deep seabed, that has to be protected, and that we do not fully understand what is the relationship of some of these creatures to larger biodiversity and ecosystems. Let me give an example. A bee may appear to be an insignificant creature, an insignificant insect. We now know the role that bees play in agriculture, in fertilization, and so on. Not fertilization, pollination, and so on. Well, bees, sir. The birds and the bees, yeah. So perhaps I was wrong. Sorry? In pollination, and of their critical value in biodiversity and natural ecosystems. So the argument is that we do not know those relationships in the deep sea bed, and that before deep sea mining is allowed, we need to have more science that explains these relationships before we cause harm that might be irreparable. The counter to that is there are valuable minerals particularly used in renewable energy technologies that are to be found in the deep seabed, and that they can be extracted with minimal damage using existing technologies to these ecosystems, and therefore we need not fear. So deep seabed mining is very much an alive, active, important area that is going to come to this region in one way or another, whether people ask us, and here's the relationship that you have to understand. To do deep seabed mining under the ISA, you have to have a member country as a partner. So even if you were a private entity with billions of dollars to do the exploration yourself, to conduct or engage in exploration, you still need a member state to be your partner. And this, of course, has risks for reputational damage. The level of the state, should anything go wrong. So there are these discussions and activities that are going on at the global level, which do have implications for Barbados and the Caribbean, and we have to be conscious of these developments. So I'm very pleased to see that the legislation treats to the issue of deep sea mining for the first time. We now have legislation which deals with one of the most current international maritime issues, which is one of the most important maritime issues in recent times. And that brings me, sir, to my final point, which is the legislation deals in large measure with BBNJ, biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. This treaty was agreed, I think we now have, came into force because it had the number of signatories required last year. I believe Barbados is now a signatory country, but we played a significant role, if I may call the name, Deputy High Commissioner at Ghana, Juliet Bob-Riley. She's here? Oh. Okay, I didn't know that. But at the time she was deputy at New York, and then she went on to Ghana. She played a significant role. She and Dr. Leo Brewster from the CZ, Coastal Zone Management Unit, sir, to use a Barbadian expression, the two of them know this area tall. And it is extremely important because it has implications for how we use our maritime resources. I made the point earlier that material from Jamaica's maritime waters was used in the development of the COVID vaccine, for which they got nothing. We have to be able to monitor the biodiversity, the creatures, structures called coral are living creatures, coral reefs are living creatures in our waters. We have to be able to know who's coming in and overfishing and taking out our fish stocks. What level of fish stocks we are losing, if any. We have to be able to collect information and to know these things. And BBNJ specifically allows the sustainable use of the maritime jurisdiction, particularly in relation to the protection of our biodiversity. It covers areas such as marine genetic resources. You know, people come in, they take materials, they do research, we don't get any benefit from whatever is developed. That has to stop. They look at area-based management tools such as marine protected areas. It encompasses environmental impact assessments, which are critical to social, economic, and environmental protection, and it deals with the issue of capacity building. Yes, you are a big company or a big country and you want to come and do research in our waters. Yes, we are going to give a limited license. We have to have some of the genetic material. We have to be able to know and follow what you are doing with it. We must be able to know how you are using it and profiting from it. And we have to be able to get financial benefit from it. And finally, you got to train our people in the technology too. All of that is encompassed in the area of the BBNJ legislation, which we have now basically incorporated into national legislation through the legislative instrument before the chamber. Mr. President, you have signaled to me that I need to come home, and I am happy to do so, sir, because this is a good point on which to arrive home, that the protection of our maritime resources, come ashore. Sir, there are times when we're out to sea and so bad. The protection of our maritime jurisdiction in terms of oil and gas, in terms of BBNJ, in terms of ensuring that our resources are available for the use and benefit of future generations, and ensuring that we get the appropriate economic benefits for our people from using our marine resources is of critical importance, and this legislation covers from earth to sea to sky, and I am happy to support it.
Thank you very much. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I thank the Honourable Deputy President for her contribution to this debate and her broader contribution to the development of international law of the sea, the maritime space. She is presently, although not mentioned, the Barbados Ambassador for Law of the Sea. She remains in that role creditably to her credit, but also as the minister at the time, and we were able to, while sitting here, Senator Walcott, for those people who know him well, know that he has a formidable ability to pull documents back from centuries and periods of time that he has created and curated as a library. And he was able to find the 2007 paper from the Ministry of Environment when the Honourable Deputy President was the Minister of Environment, and the demarcation of the blocks took place at that time. And one thing I do want to be clear on, though, and it came up maybe 2 Senates ago, there was a senator, I believe, who at the time spent a lot of time on the radio and had raised some concerns about oil rigs being set up off of the iconic Carlisle Bay. You were in the chair at the time. And I recall having to rise on a point of order to correct the record. And I want to take the opportunity here now, having spoken in particular through Madam Deputy President extensively about offshore oil blocks being demarcated and the exploration of oil, to make clear for the record yet again that the blocks as defined may have Barbadian names like Oistins, like Carlisle Bay, but that does not reflect the location of the offshore blocks. In fact, they are very far offshore, and Senator Walcott is here showing where they are. So I would not want the message to go out there to Barbadians yet again that there is going to be this rig set up off of Browns Beach or Carlisle Bay, because that's just the name of it, to give a nod to our heritage as Barbadians. Absolutely. I also want to speak about, very briefly, to qualify the question raised by Madam Deputy President about there being a sovereign fund. There was always then to be the proposal for there to be a mechanism for there to be a sovereign fund. There is still a mechanism under the Barbados National Energy Company to be able to take responsibility for the stake for Barbadians that would then be unpassed to Barbadians walking the street to be able to have a portion of their patrimony. And I believe that I recall maybe a few years ago, we had the opportunity to pass approve a structure that created a sovereign fund that is meant to have the vesting of assets, including our offshore patrimony. So that is very much still the objective of the government. And I want to also just speak to the question of the balancing of the messaging between climate, Barbados is a climate state, and Barbados is an oil and gas state. And the reality of it is that I believe in this chamber and in the other place, we've spoken about this for a long time, that apparent conflict. And that year where we had the tripling of renewables at the COP summit at the time in Abu Dhabi, that year, I believe both Senator Walcott and Madam Deputy President were at that COP, Conference of the Parties of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. And in that conference, there was an extensive discussion, and at the time I was Energy Minister, and there was an extensive discussion around how to bring oil producing states, the oil majors, into the climate conversation. And the then president of COP at the time brought all of the oil majors to the table in Abu Dhabi to talk about what you have heard Prime Minister Motley speaking about over the last few years, a methane pact, reducing methane and ensuring that for existing fossil fuel investments that it was done more cleanly, because if it wasn't going away in its entirety, that it had to not contribute to global warming and the climate crisis that Barbados has been advocating for. And that remains a key part of the conversation. You also heard the Honourable Prime Minister in the other place speak about, at the time, whether Barbados would go for oil and gas. And this is why I'm saying, we must remember that these are not new conversations. And you heard the Prime Minister say in the other place, if, I think it was during an estimates debate or a budget statement, if there were those that would pay Barbados to leave the oil and gas in the ground, she would happily take those resources. That was said in the other place. So this has been a long-standing balancing act that Barbados has invested in. And then once we started to navigate the oil and gas crisis as a consequence of what was happening in the Middle East, then we had to have a different look at what the available resources were for Barbados to achieve genuine energy security while not compromising our renewable energy ambitions. And so I just wanted to be able to say those additional things. Finally, on the questions raised about manpower, availability and technical capability for staff, this is a reality across all ministries and in all departments, especially in areas which are highly specialized like this one. But the Ministry of International Transport, alongside, and you'll hear it in another matter which will come shortly, on matters in maritime transport, international transport, and civil aviation, this ministry, in partnership with the international agencies, have been working assiduously to be able to upskill, to train up, and to have the benefit of consulting support to be able to augment their capability to implement, to monitor, and to enforce large bodies of regulation or legislation such as these. And so I give the assurance that this is something that is being considered, is actively underway with the support of the Technical Assistance Unit of the International Maritime Organization, and it is being led ably by the Minister with responsibility for tourism and international transport. And so, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill at this time be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The next ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honour do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair and the Honourable the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The next ayes have it.
The Honourable, the Senate is now in committee.
Madam Chair, permission to call this bill in parts, please.
Yes, of course, permission granted.
Part 1, clauses 1 to 11.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 1, clauses 1 through 11 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 1, clauses 1 through 11 do now stand part. All those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 12 to 31.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 2, clauses 12 to 31 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 2, clauses 12 through 31 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 32 to 41.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 3, clauses 32 through 41 do now stand part at this time.
The question is that Part 3, clauses 32 through 41 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 42 to 78.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 4, clauses 42 through 78 stand part.
The question is that Part 4, clauses 42 through 78 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 79 to 168.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 5, clauses 79 through 168 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 5, clauses 79 through 168 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 6, clauses 169 to 199.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 6, clauses 169 through 199 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 6, clauses 169 through 199 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 7, clauses 200 to 218.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 7, clauses 200 to 218 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 7, clauses 200 to 218 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 8, clauses 219 to 254.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 8, clauses 219 to 254 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 8, clauses 219 to 254 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 9, clauses 255 to 258.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 9, clauses 255 to 258 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 9, clauses 255 to 258 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 10, clauses 259 to 276.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 10, clauses 259 to 276 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 10, clauses 259 to 276, 259 to 276 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 11, clauses 277 to 283.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 11, clauses 277 to 283 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 11, clauses 277 to 283 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 12, clauses 284 to 290.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 12, clauses 284 through 290 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 12, clauses 284 through 290 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 13, clauses 291 to 304.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 13, clauses 291 to 304 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 13, clauses 291 to 304 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 14, clauses 305 to 310.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 14, clauses 305 to 310 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 14, clauses 305 to 310 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 15, clauses 311 to 385.
Thank you, Madam Deputy President. I beg to move that Part 15, clauses 311 through 385 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 15, clauses 311 to 385 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Madam Chair, the first schedule to the 17th schedule be the respective schedules to the
Madam Deputy President, I beg to move that the first schedule through the 17th schedule be the respective schedules to the bill.
The question is that Schedule 1 through Schedule 17 be Schedule 1 through 17 to the bill. All honourable senators in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The Deputy President has reported the passing of one bill in committee. Senator comments.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as a Seafarers Act 2026.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Seafarers Act 2026. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Order number 2, sir. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Maritime Areas Jurisdiction and Rights Bill 2026.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move this bill be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honour do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that he do not leave the chair, and the Honourable the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Honourable, the Senate is now in committee.
Permission once again, Madam Chair, to call bill in parts.
Permission granted once again.
Part 1, clauses 1 to 4.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 1, clauses 1 through 4 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 1, clauses 1 through 4 do now stand part. Will all honourable members in favour please say yes? Will all honourable senators against please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 5 to 14.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 2, clauses 5 through 14 stand part.
The question is that Part 2, clauses 5 through 14 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say nay. The ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 15 to 21.
Madam Deputy President, I beg to move that Part 3, clauses 15 through 21 stand part.
The question is that Part 3, clauses 15 through 21 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 22 to 50.
Madam Deputy President, I beg to move that Part 4, clauses 22 through 50 do now stand part.
The question is that clauses 22 through 50 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 51 to 64.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 5, clauses 51 through 64 stand part.
The question is that Part 5, clauses 51 through 64 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 6, clauses 65 to 81.
Madam Deputy President, I beg to move that Part 6, clauses 65 through 81 stand part.
The question is that Part 6, clauses 65 through 81 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say nay? The ayes have it.
Part 7, clauses 82 to 89.
Madam Chair, Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 7, clauses 82 through 89 stand part.
The question is that Part 7, clauses 82 through 89 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 8, clauses 90 to 106.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 8, clauses 90 through 106 stand part.
The question is that Part 8, clauses 90 through 106 do not stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The Deputy President has reported the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Maritime Areas Jurisdiction and Rights Act of 2026.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Maritime Areas Jurisdiction and Rights Act 2026. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Order number 4, sir. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Civil Aviation Bill 2026.
Senator the Honourable Lisa Collins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This is certainly not as long and as tedious as the first bill, which we just went through, but it is no less comprehensive, and I want to take a few moments to go through what we have here. Mr. President, in 2022, when I believe I was the Minister of Tourism and International Transport at the time, we had spent a lot of time going through Barbados, going into a new civil aviation space. It was coming out of the 2022 legislation that we are repealing and replacing with this 2026 bill, that particular suite of legislation, that first civil aviation bill of 2022 was passed. And when that legislation was passed, we introduced for the first time a series of provisions for civil aviation. And what were some of those things? Aviation security, aviation safety. We wanted to be able to establish Barbados as a civil aviation hub because we were building out a tourism industry with flights coming from all over the globe, in particular from our major tourism destinations, tourism source markets, and we wanted to make sure that Barbados had an aviation space that was fit for purpose. We spent at the time, and I remember one year, I took a lot of blows for it, because instead of going to a tourism marketers conference, I went instead to the International Civil Aviation Authority in Montreal, Canada. And it was because we were at the time deeply embedded in building out this aviation sector. And the work of the International Civil Aviation that I will call from here on in ICAO helped us considerably. ICAO provided us with technical assistance. ICAO provided us at the time in 2022 with technical cooperation professionals who came from around the globe, and we had a team of persons here working with us on that 2022 piece of legislation and the initial regulations that went along with it. But ICAO is an entity like the International Maritime Organization that is constantly upgrading to meet new international standards, new technological developments, and new innovation. And so the Minister of Tourism and International Transport has done a considerable body of work since that 2022 piece of legislation to be able now to have the Civil Aviation Authority established, to be able to have the safety and aviation committees established, to have persons now undertaking new critical roles in aviation. We saw at one point we did have an FAA audit during my time as Minister of International Transport, and we've had a subsequent one since then under our present Minister of International Transport to make sure that the independent barometers that Barbados has signed up for are in fact being enforced. We talk a lot in this country about things like, we like to throw around words like transparency and predictability and accountability. But accountability and transparency come in instruments like this, where Barbados has signed up to clear, objective standards established and followed by countries everywhere in any sector of any aspect of aviation, and that they are enforced by inspection. That's what this bill is about effectively. And what the bill effectively does in 2026 is to repeal what was done in 2022, because there are substantial amendments that have now been made pursuant to those objective international criteria that Barbados has signed up for. What are those international objective criteria? In the first instance, the amendments relate to redefining or refining the definitions in the 2022 bill. New terms are meant to be added to align the existing ones with those now found in the ICAO annexes to the Chicago Convention. Now, the Chicago Convention is a primary piece of legislation governing, it's a primary convention governing all of this legislation. First, the 2022 legislation, now the 2026 legislation. And one of the key things about regulations is that the convention itself that countries have signed up for has not changed. The convention remains the same, but regulations serve by way of ministerial order nationally or by the council at ICAO internationally to update continuously what the implementation standards are. So you don't go back and relitigate either the principal act if you're dealing with legislation or the convention if you're dealing with an international instrument, but you update it by way of regulations which are approved and agreed to at the technical level, not at the political level. And so you have now changes being made here to align Annex 17 of the Chicago Convention in line with the security standards to ensure that legislation scope beyond traditional safety, licensing, and operational matters encompass new comprehensive security standards. It also speaks about improving operational efficiency, which then will allow the Director General, and the Director General is also a creature of the last piece of legislation. We did not have a Director General for Civil Aviation before. We had a Director of Civil Aviation, and they did not fall under a separate statutory instrument. They do now. And to ensure that their overall responsibilities, which authorize the Civil Aviation Authority as a statutory entity to issue binding directives and conduct oversight in accordance with international safety, security, and other recommended standards. And why is this the case? If Barbados, I don't know anything about flying a plane. I have no idea. I don't know if anyone here does. But even if they did, they had to conform to something. They had to conform to an international standard of some kind at the highest available level. That's where ICAO comes in. That's where standards come in. So that when you fly into Toronto Pearson International Airport, or you fly into JFK, into New York, you fly a commercial jet, there are standards for those. Each flight, each aircraft type that you fly on, there are international standards for those. If you fly a small craft, there are international standards for those. And every country is responsible for enforcing those standards in their national jurisdiction. We also have regulatory clarity, which is being updated in this legislation by ensuring that the provisions in the legislation will be harmonized with the new regulations of the ICAO annexes, but also integrating the international air law treaties. So this allows for Barbados to ensure that under the international air law treaties, our obligations are also being updated. It also importantly establishes updated guidelines under the framework for aircraft management. Once upon a time, when we used to have just gasoline cars or diesel cars, you know, you could put, when you go into the car wash, this is a pet peeve of mine these days, when you go to the car wash or you go to the guys who are washing your car, they used to armor all your tires. You remember they used to armor all your tires? And it used to look good on a certain type of vehicles. But new fashion vehicles that come now with things like brake, auto hold, where you could stop. Once you press the brake, the car stops, you could take your foot off the brake. They don't like it when you put armor. Those cars don't like it when you put armor all on your tires anymore. So the guys that used to clean your car before had to learn, or are still learning, not to put armor all on these newfangled vehicles. Because the way you maintain them now is not the way you used to maintain cars then. So equally, it does a car, an aircraft is the same thing. The technology has evolved, it is evolving. And so it is important that there are updated frameworks as technology changes and newfangled equipment comes into effect for aircraft management. That is being established in the legal framework and the clear procedures for managing aircraft, but it also goes into looking at the relocation of abandoned aircraft, the disposal of unclaimed aircraft, and the relocation of decommissioned aircraft, all in alignment with international best practices. But it also speaks about the ability to have the minister to issue special administrative orders during times of strategic need. This is actually critical because the Civil Aviation Act really allows for the minister to have certain powers and to allow for a licensee, when they have contravened international obligations, to be suspended. That is provided for here. But then finally, and perhaps the easiest part of it, and I know many members here a lot of times point out typographical errors, grammatical errors in pieces of legislation. Maybe not in this Senate, but in previous Senates we had persons who specialized principally in the English language as opposed to legislative development. And so you had a series of small amendments that really are the work of the Law Review Commission that tidies up legislation once it leaves that place. But this piece of legislation, the 2026 legislation, also cleans up any existing errors that may have been in place under the 2022 legislation. So let me just go through the sections very briefly for the benefit of the colleagues. We've got a number of sections. I've already outlined what the various sections do. And we have here under Part 5, staffing. I spoke about the Director General, and the reason why I'm starting there, what the functions of the Director General are. Private pension plan, this is important, and most times you have seen in every institution we have created, whether it was the NISS, the Business Barbados, BNECL, with the amalgamating the oil companies, the energy companies, in each instance you have transitioned into a private pension plan to allow for persons to have the benefits of their employment. The administrative and financial arrangements are captured in Part 6. We also have provisions relating to property, because in this instance you have things like, I just talked about the relocation of abandoned aircraft or vehicles and its disposal. That is covered in Part 7. What are the regulations for aviation operators and service providers? They must operate on the basis of something. They don't operate on the basis of national law in a vacuum, but they operate on the basis of national law in accordance with international standards. Aerodromes, which is the airport, we call the airport an aerodrome, and it gives authority to the Civil Aviation Authority to approve the construction of or the operation of an aerodrome. And a classic example, Mr. President, is if the airport for any reason is ever closed, a lot of people see the airport as the airport. They don't realize that the airport, like the Bridgetown Port, is an ecosystem. There are many people and many entities working internal to the airport. The Grantley Islands International Airport, the aerodrome, as is defined here in Part 9 of this legislation, is governed by the Civil Aviation Authority. If the Civil Aviation Authority closes the airport, the Grantley Islands International Airport must close. They are responsible for the aerodrome. If there is debris on the runway from one thing or the other, it is the Civil Aviation Authority that will instruct the Grantley Islands International Airport to close. And they cannot open the airport again until the Civil Aviation Authority gives them authority to do so. You may get, on occasions, you get what we call a NOTAM, which is a notice to pilots, and that may go out to say that the aerodrome is closed. That is issued not by the airport, but by Civil Aviation Authority. Air traffic control, that is governed equally by the Civil Aviation Authority. Training and all of those kinds of things happen there. So that's where the aerodrome comes in Part 9. In Part 10, civil aircraft registration and the rules governing how they are to be registered, that also is covered there. Air transport licensing and permits. This is important. Aircraft landing in Barbados must meet certain requirements. When you see sometimes if you're traveling on a plane, Mr. President, and the plane is delayed, you can't take off, oh, it's not been cleared as yet, or we're having a technical issue, the engineering teams are working on the aircraft. Until they have completed working and they have been cleared by air traffic by the Civil Aviation Authority, and that they meet, every aircraft is required to submit their maintenance logs to civil aviation, because they have to ensure that when passengers are traveling in these planes, they meet not Beijing standards on their own, but ICAO standards globally. That's what we implement here. Sometimes it's inconvenient. Sometimes individuals may prefer, well, why can't we do this and why can't we do that? Because if we do it for you to be able to evade or to avoid taking responsibility for what the Civil Aviation Authority is asking of you, this country will bear the impact of that. The airport will lose its certification because you want to be exempted, just you. The country cannot take responsibility for individual exceptions that will cost the country a bigger price. And so the Civil Aviation Authority takes a very strong position on ensuring that everyone, without exception, complies with the requirements that Barbados must uphold internationally. We also have civil aviation security requirements, and this is not just even ICAO on its own, but entities like the FAA, and I say that in this instance because you have a large number of aircraft flying into Barbados that are US flagged, and in order to be able to land in Barbados and then land in their state of origin or country of origin, they have to ensure that this airport meets the required standards. And so that is covered in this legislation. It also covers things like dangerous flying, passenger offenses, can't behave like you feel like, but equally then under the miscellaneous section, which is section 16, it talks about just a series of miscellaneous provisions, detention of an aircraft, because that can happen, sharing of information, that can happen, interception of aircraft, that has happened, and the proceedings that are required under the legislation in the event that any of these things happen. And then, of course, you have the schedule that outline the way in which the National Civil Aviation Security Committee is established, the National Air Transport Facilitation Committee, and what the Civil Aviation Tribunal is looking like in the event that someone is aggrieved or is opposed to a ruling of the authority, that there is an appellate mechanism. So this is the legislation before the Chamber, and I beg to move that this bill now be read a second time.
Senator Malado.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will be brief. I'll start out by saying that this is a piece of legislation that I will support, and I am going to be sounding like a stock record. I really only have one comment to make, and I will frame it where we are, as a country, continuing to bring forward legislation to take us into this new world, this world-class legislation where we want to be. And this piece of legislation, as Senator Cummings has pointed out, is exactly to do that, to bring us into this world, and tourism is a huge part of our business. But like many other pieces of legislation that this government has been bringing before us, it lacks a critical element which relates to how the implementation of it is going to be done, and that is to add to it some statutory service standards. What shall we expect in terms of how long it will take to issue a license, these permits? How long will it do for aircraft registration, foreign operator approvals, certificates, renewals? All of these things can damage tourism, which is very important to us. And all I have been harping on and asking in all of these various pieces of legislation, all of the various authority that we're passing to these government departments and areas, is to have some service standards that are published, that are part of what it is that we're doing, We wish to be world class, but unfortunately, sir, in many, many areas, while we have good legislation, we have implementation deficit disorder, I guess. We are so many things that all of us as Barbadians know that we have to wait way too long for them to happen. And we should not be ignoring the need to build it within the legislation to what are our service standards. So, as I said earlier on another thing we discussed today, and I had said in the past, I believe that the levels of service that our customers should require of us should be published, and it should be a part of the legislation that says how well are we doing towards that. There should be regularly published information to say how well we are doing to be meeting those standards. With those few words, sir, I'll support the bill.
Thank you very much, Senator Maladu. Any other speakers? Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to thank Senator Malaloux for raising the point, and I agree with him on service standards. I, however, also run the risk of being a stuck record to say that service standards are not the subject of legislative drafting, and that they may very well form the part of regulations or a service level charter, but they're not the substance of which legislative drafting is made. So we're both sounding like service records, even though we both agree on the principle of the thing. This is not where they belong, not in legislation. And I believe my good friend and Senate colleague, Senator Malaloux, has heard us speak about that as a role, as a non-legislative matter, even if it is an agreed principle that we all share. Mr. President, with those few words, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that you do not leave the chair, Your Honour, and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair, and the Honourable the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Honourable, the Senate is now in committee.
Madam Chairman, permission to call in parts.
Indeed, permission granted.
Clause 1.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Clause 1 stand part.
The question is that Clause 1 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against please say nay. The ayes have it.
Part 1, clauses 2 and 3.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that Part 1, clauses 2 and 3 stand part.
The question is that Part 1, clauses 2 and 3 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 4 to 7.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 2, Clauses 4 through 7 stand part.
The question is that Part 2, Clauses 4 through 7 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 8 to 14.
Madam Deputy Chair, I beg to move, Madam Deputy President, I beg to move that Part 3, Clauses 8 through 14 stand part.
The question is that Part 3, Clauses 8 through 14 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 15 to 20.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 4, Clauses 15 through 20 stand part.
The question is that Part 4, Clauses 15 through 20 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say nay? The ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 21 to 27.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 5, Clauses 21 through 27 stand part.
The question is that Part 5, Clauses 2.1 through 2.7 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say nay? The ayes have it.
Part 6, clauses 28 to 36.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 6, Clauses 28 through 36 stand part.
The question is that Part 6, Clauses 28 through 36 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say nay? The ayes have it.
Part 7, clauses 37 to 47.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 7, Clauses 37 through 47 stand part.
The question is that Part 7, Clauses 37 through 47 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 8, clauses 48 to 75.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 8, Clauses 48 through 75 stand part.
The question is that Part 8, Clauses 48 through 75 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 9, clauses 76 to 81.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 9, Clauses 76 through 81 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 9, Clauses 76 through 81 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say nay? The ayes have it.
Part 10, clauses 82 to 88.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 10, Clauses 82 through 88 stand part.
The question is that Part 10, Clauses 82 through 88 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 11, clauses 89 to 97.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 11, Clauses 89 through 97 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 11, Clauses 89 through 97 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 12, clauses 98 to 111.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 12, Clauses 98 through 111 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 12, clauses 98 through 111, not a bad number. 111, do not stand part. All honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Indeed they do, the ayes have it.
Part 13, clauses 112 to 114.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 13, clauses 112 to 114 stand part.
The question is that Part 13, clauses 112 to 114 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 14, clauses 115 to 121.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 14, clauses 115 through 121 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 14, clauses 115 to 121 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 15, clauses 122 to 140.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 15, clauses 122 through 140 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 15, clauses 122 to 140 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Part 16, clauses 141 to 165.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 16, clauses 141 through 165 stand part.
The question is that Part 16, clauses 141 to 165 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
First schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
The question is that the first schedule be now the first schedule to the bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say nay. The ayes have it.
Second schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill.
The question is that the second schedule be now the second schedule to the bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Third schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill.
The question is that the third schedule be now the third schedule to the bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye?
Aye.
Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Fourth schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the fourth schedule be the fourth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the fourth schedule be now the fourth schedule to the bill. All honourable senators in favour please say aye. Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Fifth schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the fifth schedule be the fifth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the fifth schedule be now the fifth schedule to the bill. All honourable senators in favour please say aye. Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The sixth schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the sixth schedule be the sixth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the sixth schedule be now the sixth schedule to the bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the President the passage of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say nay? The ayes have it.
The Deputy President has reported the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I'd like to move that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The thanks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I'd like to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Civil Aviation Act 2026.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Civil Aviation Act 2026. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The thanks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Mr. President, that brings us, with appreciation to all honourable members of the Senate, to the end of government's business for today. And I beg to move that today's sitting be adjourned until Wednesday, June 17 at 10 a.m. The adjournment, June 17 at 10 a.m. At 11 a.m.
The question is that the Honourable Senate may now adjourn until Wednesday, June 17th at 11 a.m. Before I put the question, however, just one note of appreciation. I don't think we may meet. This will happen before we come back. I understand our security guard, who's been here for quite a while, 20 years or so of his 34 years in the service, is retiring very soon. I think he mentioned to me in passing this morning that he will be going in a few days. What's his name again? Yes. What's his name? Gary Ali. He has been a perfect example to the many members of the government security service. They're not permanently assigned to Parliament, but for the time that he has been here, he's certainly always been very helpful, very accommodating to all of us, and I certainly would want to, on your behalf, record our appreciation to Mr. Allen and to wish him well in his retirement.
Speaking on the adjournment, sir, I feel that I must say a few words because he comes from a community which I formerly represented. And it would be remiss of me not to thank him for his service to this Parliament and to our nation. I wish to observe, sir, that so often those of us whose faces are seen on television, it is our faces, our names, our words, our perspectives that become known. But those who ensure that we have a meal on time, those who ensure that we are kept secure, those who ensure that this building is cleaned and that the facilities are appropriately upkept, those who service the Parliament, and those who service by extension the nation, people never see them. They don't know their names. And maybe they're not even interested, but they play such a critical role in ensuring that we function, that we perform well, and that we can do what the people send us here to do. And Mr. Aline is one of those, part of that core and cadre of people to whom we owe gratitude for the silence, but high quality of their service. Mr. Aline is one of the more attentive of the officers. He always ensures that you are parked properly. And sir, one of the things that I always observe about him is that in an era where police officers don't bother to salute anymore, people don't know your name, they don't know who high-level protectees are. Security people working in security don't know who high-level protectees are. They tell ministers, okay, you park over there, this for the distinguished people, and things of that sort. Mr. Aline was always very careful to stand at attention, to be appropriate, to be kind, to be courteous. He really was the embodiment of what a good security officer should be. He knew who the people were and the directions that they needed to give them. He was always right with their rules. He came very close at one time, serving, I think, at the airport where he was posted before coming here, to being named Security Guard of the Year, which is no small thing. He was edged out by another person, but the fact that he was recognized speaks always to the quality, a continuing quality of his service. You know, some people start very well, over time they become very lax in their behavior. Mr. Ali was not one of those. And his conversation with me this morning, sir, he said a very interesting thing. He is taking early retirement because he wants to do other things and wants to have some enjoyment with his life and, you know, have new adventures. And I salute him for taking that decision. He has put in his 33 1/3 in the government service. I wish him God's blessings and good health, and that the winds of fortune will be at his back as he goes on these new adventures. He goes with our respect and certainly with my prayers.
And so say all of us. The question is that the Honourable Senate do now adjourn until Wednesday, June the 17th at 11 a.m. Will those Honourable Senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. The sitting is therefore adjourned.